This is the Roots and All podcast, and I'm your host, Sarah Wilson. Join me as I talk about all aspects of gardening with some of the top horticulturists from around the world. Hello, and welcome to this episode of the podcast. This episode is brought to you by our friends at Natural Grower. Launched in 2019, their award-winning liquid fertiliser and plant feed and soil conditioner is made entirely from maize. Naturally rich in nitrogen, potash, phosphate and other trace elements that plants and vegetables love, it's approved by the Soil Association, Vegan Society and organic farmers and growers. Their concentrated natural fertiliser can be poured around the base of plants, whilst the plant feed and soil conditioner can be mixed into the soil or compost and used as a mulch on the surface as a long-term slow-release fertiliser. The fertiliser can be used for all outdoor and indoor plants. And as a special offer for listeners, Natural Grower are offering 15% off all their range. Simply go to naturalgrower.co.uk and enter Roots15 on checkout, all uppercase. So this week I'm speaking to Danielle Draper, manager of the Cats Protection National Cat Adoption Centre in Surrey. And we're talking about that sometimes contentious issue of cats and gardens. Cats are part of gardeners' lives, particularly if you live in an urban area. Love them or hate them, you can't get away from them. And Danielle's here to talk about learning to live harmoniously alongside the neighbourhood felines.
Yes, so the latest statistics that Cats Protection have released show that there are 10.2 million owned cats in the UK. That's one for about every 6 people. So it's a huge number of cats out there, and they are very popular for very good reasons. They're great for de-stressing us, and there's actually some research to prove that cats are very good for bringing down our stress levels. And they make great pets. So I think, they are probably growing in popularity. But with that comes the issue of the demand. I think if more and more people are wanting to take on a cat as a pet, then it's driving that force for online sales. And that is something as a charity that we are seeing an issue with. And that issue is growing year on year. It's more and more cats and kittens in particular being sold online. And there's a big problem there because people don't know where they're getting that kitten from, what kind of life it's had, whether it's been well cared for. Whether mum is being bred without any health consideration to her. So we would always recommend, if anyone is looking to take on a cat or a kitten as their new pet, is to do your research, make sure that you know where you're getting that cat from. And if you do choose to adopt, which obviously we would recommend, we've got many branches and adoption centres throughout the whole of the UK. All with cats looking for new homes and kittens. So there's always a cat out there that is looking for a new home with somebody.
Yes, that's very, very good advice in my book. So obviously we are talking about gardens and gardening and cats. And there was a survey done by the Mammal Society, and they have published the statistic that cats are responsible for the deaths of 100 million prey, and I say put this in inverted quotes, prey items every year. So I'm assuming that could be anything from flies to moths to birds to bats to anything. So have you, as a charity, kind of looked into those figures? Have you done any research into that? And do you agree with those figures?
Well, we haven't done our own research into those figures, but we do have good research from very well-known organisations such as the RSPB that has shown that cats are not necessarily the primary cause of the declining numbers of birds in particular. So we do recognise that cats are naturally predatory animals. You know, they do need to hunt. That's just something that's natural to them. And but there's so many other factors that we should be considering for bird and small mammal species loss, such as mismanagement and loss of traditional wildlife habitat. You know, there's so many new buildings going up and so many green spaces that are declining rapidly that those animals that have lived there for years and years that are losing that space around them. climate change, obviously, increased use of pesticides and fertilizers in farming. So there's an awful lot of other things that need to be considered around that declining number. And cats are not the primary cause of that. There's so many other factors that need to be considered. But do you know, cats do tend to kill the weak and the sickly birds. So it's not even clear whether cat predation replaces other forms of death or is in addition to what would have been a natural death anyway, if that makes sense. So yeah, there's a lot to consider there, but I don't think that there's enough research to show that cats are the main source of those figures. So
yes, no, that's a really good point actually, about the fact that actually they may be taking on a role of a larger predator that has been lost. So yeah, that's really interesting. So actually, I suppose you've answered the question that I was going to ask you next, really, which was, you know, in view of all the problems that wildlife have, you know, cats in the bigger picture, then by the sounds of it, probably don't account for, you know, much of the loss.
No, especially like I say, if they are naturally killing the weak and the sick, in particular birds or small mammals, then no, I don't think that they do sit in that bigger picture. I think there's a bigger picture there, if you know what I mean, that the driving forces behind those declining numbers. So
I suppose sometimes they're a scapegoat, really. Yeah. Okay. So, well, thinking about our gardens, so on a slightly smaller scale, but also where, you know, cats and wildlife will rub up against each other. I know not all gardeners like cats, and I am not one of those because I love cats. So if you really, really are a gardener and you really don't like cats and you don't want to have them in your garden, is it sensible to think that you could deter them altogether?
There are certain things that you could do to deter cats from your gardens, but cats are very agile. They're very good climbers. They're very good at negotiating fences. And, you know, they are part of our life and they like being outside, generally speaking. So, it's quite natural for them to have a little wander around. So, you could put up high fencing. There are certain fencing now that you can buy that don't allow cats into the gardens. There are other things that you can do to deter cats. Some of them are quite far out there, or whether they work or not is not really for me to say. I don't know if there's been enough to say that they do, but I know that there are people put statues of cats in their gardens just so that another cat thinks that there's a cat in their garden. But I did speak to somebody that did that, and the cat that used to visit just started rubbing against the chair and quite liked it. So I think he was trying to make friends. But, if somebody really doesn't want a cat in their garden, you can certainly, kindly shoo the cat away. You can, we wouldn't recommend people squirt cats with water, but, if it's just a little, sometimes people get these infrared detector garden sprays that just come on when they detect movement, which isn't going to drench the cat. It's not going to cause it any harm, but it might be enough for the cat to think, you know what, that wasn't much fun. I don't think I'll go back there. But that all said, it's all about territory, and that is what cats need. That's naturally what cats need. They need territory space, and walking along that back end of someone's garden might just be the edge of their territory space where they need to walk along to get to where they need to go. So cats have to work out their territory, especially in built up areas where there's maybe a number of cats living in the same area. Then they need to work that out. And sometimes that's where you get fights and conflicts happening between cats, because they're trying to fight out a particular garden that they both need to try and get to that next part. But I've been in some training, which is fascinating, when they actually mapped out this whole road and where the cats go and how they cross over to avoid another cat's territory. And it was like one cat would have the whole of garden A and then come into garden B, but just skirt round the edge and up past the tree and then over the fence. And then the rest of garden B belonged to another cat. So it is all about territory. And, that sometimes is where the problems arise, because that cat really does need to come across there because it hasn't got another option to get back to where it needs to go, or where its territory space is mapped out. And by us trying to deter them from doing that, we might be pushing them into another cat's territory. And then that's when you get sort of conflict happening.
That's fascinating. Who knew? So what you don't want is your garden to be like in the cat equivalent of Spaghetti Junction or something. So if you don't want cats in there. There is a myth, and I know it's a myth because my cats always poo in my garden. The myth is that cats don't use their own gardens as toilets. Obviously that is an issue for people. If they don't have cats and other people's cats are coming in and using their garden as a loo, is there anything they can do to discourage that, or again, to kind of deter the cats from doing it? Or is it just part and parcel of having cats in your neighbourhood?
Well, firstly, cats need to go to the toilet, obviously, and they need to do that somewhere, be that in a litter tray in their home or outside, in their garden or someone else's garden. But again, it's quite often around territory as well. So when it's in someone else's garden, it could be, in particular urinating, it could be that they are mapping out and scent marking their territory boundary. So it tells the other cats that this area has been taken. This is mine, and this is my patch. So they will often toilet around the boundaries of their territory areas, or within their territory areas, just so that other visiting cats know that bit's taken. Thanks very much. So you can find that cats will go and toilet in other gardens, but that's probably the reason behind it. Or it might be that their own environment, they don't feel very safe or secure. So when they're toileting, they feel quite vulnerable. They going back in the day before they were even domesticated. When you go into the toilet, you're at risk from being hunted by something. So they like to feel safe and secure where they're toileting, and it might be something as simple as where they live, that the person hasn't set up the right sort of toilet area within the house if they are hoping that they're going to use a litter tray. So it could be located in a really busy environment with lots of through traffic of people and noise, or that another cat in the house is there that they don't particularly like, or a dog or something like that. That just means that they don't feel very safe and secure to go to the toilet there. So they go and find somewhere that they do feel quite safe and secure, and that might not necessarily be in their own garden. It might be somewhere else within their territory. So there's reasons behind it, I think, is what I'm trying to say. But in terms of deterring them, there are things, again, that you could try and do, especially from a gardening point of view, I guess. They like loose soil, so they like to dig, they like to cover, they're quite clean animals, so they do like to dig around in soil. So it could be that you make that soil slightly less inviting by, planting things that are a bit more prickly, or placing pine cones around. Some people have sort of put sticks around on the soil so that it's not easy for them to get that scratching movement going, which means they don't feel that comfortable about going to the toilet there. Or just actually covering the soil area with good ground cover plants. You'll probably know a lot more about that than I do. But there's also the argument, if it's a really ongoing issue, that at the end of the day, that cat is going to keep coming into your garden and it is going to use it for a toilet forever, for whatever reason, that sometimes we say to people, maybe just embrace that and just make them a toilet area. Or even if it's your own cat, just make them an area that is inviting for them to use as a toilet. So something that they can dig around in. You can even place, if there is some food in the garden, you can actually put it in there so that their scent is there. So that you've just got one area that they start using as a toilet, and therefore the rest of your garden can stay relatively clean.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. Exactly what you said about the planting. I don't think, ever seen a cat use a properly planted area for a toilet. It would be very bare. It's always in my experience kind of loose soil and bare patches of soil or gravel. So that gravel is just like one big inviting litter tray, really. So yeah, it is about, I think, considering the spaces that you've got and what you put on them. And yeah, but that's a genius idea, actually, about setting it up so that there is a designated area. I mean, that's just, that's brilliant. So I think again, we kind of touched on it, really. If there are neighbourhood cats and they're choosing to use the garden as a battleground, that is a territorial issue. If you happen to be in the firing line of some warring factions, is there anything you can do to kind of encourage harmony?
Well, cats are naturally a solitary species. So they don't necessarily, and there's obviously exceptions to the rule, and there's lots of people out there that, have got a pair of cats that are very well bonded, and they would be what we call like a social pairing. So there's lots of grooming each other, aloe rubbing, which is, entwining tails and rubbing their face against each other and stuff like that. But naturally, they're a solitary species. And yes, if you have got cats that keep fighting in the garden, it's probably because they're trying to sort out a territory space. But they do prefer to avoid conflict. They don't actually want to get into a fight because, they know they're probably going to get hurt from it. They don't actively seek necessarily conflict. I know when I've had two cats squaring up to each other in my garden, maybe me just coming out just broke that, but they lock eyes, and sometimes they can't back down because they know that the minute they turn, the other one might chase. So they're kind of in this stalemate situation, and they're just making an awful lot of noise and not a lot else. So sometimes just you coming out to intervene or break that eye contact allows the two of them to just go their separate ways, and then they can go where they need to go. So but they don't particularly like conflict. If they can avoid it, they will. But yeah, in terms of encouraging harmony, it's very difficult because the chances are that those two cats aren't actually going to live harmoniously together until they've worked out who owns what part.
So they've just got to duke it out, get on with it. So obviously we kind of again touched on the issue of birds and cats. A lot of people take great pleasure in feeding birds in their garden. What can we do if we want to put out feed for the birds, but also try and keep them safe from the cats?
We would certainly recommend feeding birds off the ground. So using bird tables and things like that, so that the birds have the advantage. Then the cat is obviously at a lesser advantage of being able to stalk across the ground and catch them. You could, I guess, if you've got certain times of the day where you feed the birds, perhaps if it's your own cat that you're worried about, then to keep your cats in during those times of when you're feeding the birds. But actually, I mean, there is an argument that feeding the birds attract other animals that people might not want to attract. And having a cat might actually keep things like mice or rats at bay as well. So you might find that having a cat works to your advantage, especially if you do want to feed birds, because, obviously they drop seeds and things like that, and that can attract other things. So there could be advantage there as well. But certainly feeding them off the ground would be our biggest advice when feeding the birds.
And how about, does it make a difference if you kind of keep the feeders away from somewhere the cats can sneak up on them? So I think sometimes, obviously, if you've got a feeder and it's maybe near a fence and then the cat's got the opportunity to jump out, is that also advisable?
Yeah, I mean, certainly in the open, because then I guess the birds have a lot more ability to see around them as well. So, if you're hanging things kind of low and in shrubbery, then it might allow the cat the advantage then to climb up and like you say, sneak up on the birds. But, I mean, just from my own experience, that my cat was just rubbish because as soon as she moved, the cat still flew away anyway. I mean, there is, obviously collars and bells and things like that. You can put a bell on a collar, but the only thing is that we would recommend that the collars are only quick release collars. it's something that we see all too often in our line of work, is cats coming in with collar injuries where they've managed to get the collar caught under their armpit and then cause sort of big wounds underneath, which can be obviously very uncomfortable and painful. So if you are going to use a collar on your cat, just make sure it's a quick release one, which basically means if it gets snagged on something, it just literally pops apart. But if you've got one of those, then you could also try a bell, because, then if they're moving quickly, it hopefully gives the birds a bit of warning. But cats are very good. They're quite good at stalking quietly. And I did meet somebody who had a cat who learnt how to creep without the bell moving.
Yeah, don't try and outsmart a cat. Get you every time. And also, actually, I was thinking as well, if we're feeding things like hedgehogs or foxes or whatever, particularly in an urban situation, I know a lot of people have those like night cameras, and so they'll be watching it thinking that they're going to see Mrs. Tiggy Winkles, and then all of a sudden next door's cat pops up eating all the food they've put out. I mean, is there anything you can do about that, or is that just fair game?
To be fair, the cat's not going to know that bowl of cat food was for the hedgehog, not for them.
No.
So, it's very hard to say that we could try and think of ways to deter that, because you're basically putting a bowl of food out, which, if a cat's walking by, it might think that looks quite nice. So, again, if it's your own cat, you could consider sort of keeping it in at night or something like that. But if it's cats that visit the area or visit your garden, then I guess it's really something that you've got to be kind of prepared that might happen, because it is, especially with hedgehogs, it's a bowl of cat food, so it's got their name on it, so they've got rights to it. So yeah, it would be very difficult, because I mean, you can get, I think, hedgehog houses and things like that perhaps you can feed them in, and then the hedgehog can go into that and the cat can't. So obviously hedgehogs are a lot smaller than a cat, so you might be able to make something that a cat couldn't go into. But with foxes and things like that, I'm not sure that you would be able to keep them away from each other when you're putting food out for them.
No,
but do bear in mind that not all food is going to be suitable as well, so that's something to consider.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, they probably wouldn't be eating, well, they might be eating leftover scraps, but yeah, different manufactured foods, I guess. And also, obviously, we've spoken about the bells on the collars and things. Is it a good idea to try and keep your cat in at night, or to try and keep them in a designated run? Do those kind of things work?
Yeah, certainly something we talk about is keeping your cat in at night for safety reasons. More accidents tend to happen at night, road traffic accidents, things like that, more fights. So, if your cat's happy to, and it's always quite good to get your cat into a bit of a routine when you get it, so that it comes in for the night, gets fed, and then doesn't go back out until the following day. That is certainly something that you can try, but not all cats are particularly happy about staying in all night, and you sometimes get behavioural issues, stress and frustration, because they prefer to be able to come and go as they please. So that would be something an owner would have to consider about their cat, and whether their cat would be happy to be kept in at night. It's quite natural for them it's very natural for them to hunt, and they become more active at sort of dawn and dusk time. So it could be that you keep them in just through those periods of the day. But also, if you are keeping them in, there are things that you could do to mimic that hunting behaviour, because they kind of need that hunt drive. It's within them. It's kind of their nature. It's built within them to need it, and they get an adrenaline rush from it. They get a good feeling from it when they're doing that natural behaviour. So if you were to use certain toys with your cat, like set aside playtimes with your cat, so like hunting toys, fishing rod toys, things that you can dangle and things that they can chase, that you can kind of, the sort of types that that are on string, and you can pull them along and the cat can kind of get closer and closer and closer and pounce. And games like that are really good to play with your cat, because it gives them that endorphin hit that they need. And if you do that enough, then they might feel satisfied enough to not then need to go out and hunt, if that makes sense. So, lots of hunt drive play, if hunting is an issue with your cat, lots of hunt, drive, play is a really good idea as something you could try and bring that hunt, drive outside down. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's fascinating.
So yeah, and mimic it properly, because they're not very successful with their hunting. So they're not always going to catch that mice or that bird. But they'll get frustrated if they don't eventually. So when you're playing with them, don't let them catch it, so that it's not becoming a boring game. So make it exciting, make them have to work for it. But now and again, let them catch it, and get that feeling that they succeeded. But, yeah, there's things that you can do. I mean, neutering your cat, that does, reduce the need for them to want to wander. Because if they're unneutered, then obviously their whole reason for going out and about is often a different reason, and they will go quite far and wide to find that mate. So neutering your cat is a really useful way of keeping your cat closer to home.
Is there anything that we can do in our gardens to either facilitate them coming in and kind of enjoying the space, or, making it kind of not so welcoming? Is there anything in terms of plants or features in the garden that might be good to include or not include?
So there's certainly plants that cats really enjoy that will attract cats in. So catmint, catnip, cat grass, all things like that. Cats will be attracted to. But equally, there's plants that cats don't particularly like. So strong smelling lavender, the smell of citrus, they don't like very much. So if you wanted to deter them, then perhaps lavender, citrus, things like that would be a good idea. But if you did want to encourage them, then yes, catmint, cat grass, things like that would do that. But it's probably important to say that whilst we're talking about encouraging cats to our garden, that cat does have a home, and sometimes the more we encourage cats into our garden, the more it might start hanging out in that garden, and then someone might start thinking that their cat's gone missing, when actually it's just down the road. So I think as long as people, if you're attracting cats to your garden, that's fine, but just don't feed them if you can, because that will potentially cause an issue for a cat moving across permanently to your garden from somebody else's. And we do have those issues pop up now and again.
Right. So we don't want to be enticing neighbourhood cats in.
Well, it might be that at the end of the day, someone's cat might have a specific health condition or need a specific diet, and we don't necessarily know that. So we've got to be careful that we're not potentially causing issues for somebody else's pet.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So just to finish up, well, before we finish on the very last question, is there anything that you in summary, that you might sort of say to people if they're really having issues with cats, or if they're just one of those people that really can't stand cats? Is there anything that you would say to them to kind of persuade them that maybe actually they're not as bad as they think?
Well, there's lots of benefits to cats, I think. And it could be that they're doing somebody a great favour and they don't even know it, that they're keeping the rodent population down. If somebody doesn't necessarily know that there's an issue in that area, it might be because the cat's actually keeping it under control. So there are some benefits, and I think, at the end of the day, it's somebody's pet, and cats make great pets, and they're lovely. And if you make friends with a cat, you'll actually see its beautiful personality. And there's nothing more beautiful than looking out of your window and seeing a cat stretched out in the sun, sunning itself on the patio. So I think that there's a lot of benefits to cats. And, I know that cats are not everyone's cup of tea, and we know that. So it might be that you just gently discourage that cat from coming to the garden. But obviously we would ask everybody is to not cause harm to that cat.
Good point. So, is there anything that people can do to help cats protection at this time? Obviously, you said you've got a lot of cats, looking for homes. Is there anything anyone can do to support your work at the moment?
So obviously, the current situation that we're all in is a strange time for everybody, and it's certainly thrown its issues towards the work that we do. But we are doing hands-free homing, because we do need to get our cats into homes. That's where they need to be. They don't want to be in our centres. They want to be in loving homes. So we are homing cats in a hands-free way, in a safe way. So do visit our website. We have cats, like I say, all over the UK. We've got voluntary run branches, we've got adoption centres, all with cats looking for new homes. So visit the website, which is cat.org.uk, and you'll be able to find the nearest branch or centre to you. Otherwise, just support the charity in any way you can. We're fundraising as much as we can. Obviously, all our events were cancelled last year, and who knows about this year. So we're doing lots of online events and ways to try and keep our donations coming in, because that's how we're going to survive. So to continue the work that we do need the generosity of the public as well.
Thank you very much to Danielle for the information and advice. If you're a cat lover and would like to support Cats Protection, you can find links in the show notes, plus more information from the charity about living with cats in your garden. And if you're not a cat lover, at least don't be a cat hater. They're not responsible for the loss of our wild bird populations. We are, us humans. So we need to take some responsibility and don't look to create scapegoats or scape cats. Thank you as well to Natural Grower, who sponsored this episode. They produce vegan and organic fertiliser and soil conditioner. And I can't recommend the soil conditioner enough. I used it for tomatoes last year, and the plants stayed really green and healthy all year, and the tomatoes were plentiful. Plus, I even found they needed watering less. It really is good stuff. And if you go to naturalgrower.co.uk and enter Roots15, all uppercase, on the checkout, you'll get a 15% discount. Thanks to you for listening. Here's Dr. Ian Bedford talking about a bug that won't be welcome at this time of year.
There's different reasons why daffodils and their related species might come up blind in the spring, which means that they produce their leaves but not their flower buds. Often, it's down to the environmental and climatical conditions, or even the age of the bulb. But it could also be an indication that the bulb is diseased, or that it's under attack from a pest. Although daffodils don't have many plant pests, there is one that can be a serious problem, often damaging and destroying many bulbs where it's become established. And this is the large Narcissus bulb fly, a hoverfly that first appeared in the UK about 120 years ago and has now become widespread. This bulb fly is about 1.5 centimetres in length and looks very much like a small hairy bumblebee, but with only one pair of wings. Varying in colour, from yellow to dark brown, they emerge on sunny days during mid-May to mate. The females then seek out the senescing daffodil leaves and lay their eggs on the neck of the bulbs. These hatch into little maggots that crawl down to the bottom of the bulb, entering it through the basal plate. Once inside, the maggots start to devour the fleshy centre, which includes the following year's flower buds. By the following spring, the maggots are fully grown, plump and creamy white in colour, and they'll leave the bulbs to pupate within the surrounding soil. Affected bulbs that were not killed by the infestation will likely survive to produce a few thin leaves before they then start to rot. Since there are no chemical options for controlling the large Narcissus bulb fly, cultural methods will need to be used. These can include growing daffodils in exposed locations rather than the shelter conditions that the bulb fly prefers. And also, removing and disposing of any weak plants in early spring that could be displaying signs of a bulb fly infestation.
You can download or listen to the podcast direct from the website rootsandall.co.uk. Please also check out my Patreon, where you can make a one-off donation or take out a monthly subscription to help support the podcast. Because if you enjoy the show, please help it continue. I also have a GoFundMe where you can make a one-off donation. Even a one-off donation of £1 helps, and I'll be really grateful for your support. So please go to Patreon or GoFundMe and search for Roots and All Podcast.